This week's episode of the And She Looked Up podcast is brought to you by our premium subscriber community on Patreon and Buzzsprout. Their ongoing financial support of the show ensures I can continue to bring the podcast to you. Want to help out? Head over to patreon.com/And She Looked Up. That's Patreon, patreon.com/And She Looked Up. There you can join the community for free, or you can choose to be a premium supporter for $4.50 a month, and that's in Canadian dollars. Paid supporters get access to a monthly exclusive podcast episode only available to premium subscribers. You can also click the Support the Show link in the episode notes on your podcast player to support us via Buzzsprout, where you will also get access to each month's exclusive premium supporter episode. I can't tell you how much I appreciate all our monthly supporters. They are the engine that keeps the podcast running, and they're a pretty cool bunch too. And now, let's get on with the show. Welcome to the And She Looked Up podcast. Each week, we sit down with inspiring Canadian women who create for a living. We talk about their creative journeys and their best business tips, as well as the creative and business mindset issues all creative entrepreneurs struggle with. I'm your host, Melissa Hartfield, and after leaving a 20-year career in corporate retail, I've been happily self-employed for 12 years. I'm a graphic designer, an illustrator, and a multi-six-figure-a-year entrepreneur in the digital content space. This podcast is for the artists, the makers, and the creatives who want to find a way to make a living doing what they love. Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of the And She Looked Up podcast. As always, I am your host, Melissa, and this week I'm so pleased to be welcoming photographer Heidi Richter to the show. Welcome, Heidi. It's so great to have you here.
Thank you so much for having me, Melissa. And it's so nice to actually get the chance to talk to you like this.
I know we've known each
Yeah,
other through the interwebs for a
yes,
while,
for a
but
long time now. I think it's probably been about 8 years or so.
something like that.
Um, so yeah, it's really nice. Thank you for having me. I'm looking forward to it.
Me too. I am really looking forward to our chat today. Heidi and I are both very avid gardeners, and I think we could probably geek out talking about
Yes.
garden things for the whole hour. But we're going to be talking about much more than just
Mhm,
gardening, although I think that
mhm.
will make an appearance at some point.
Yeah.
But for those of you who are not familiar with Heidi, she is a Vancouver Island-based food photographer, recipe developer, and blogger. You may be familiar with her website, The Simple Green. She has been working in the industry for almost a decade, and over the years, she's worked with some pretty big brands that you will recognize, like Vitamix and Nikon. Heidi is known for her moody, bold imagery, and she has a penchant for photographing her garden in the summer months, which I
Yes.
completely relate to. Something about that golden hour with you have to get your camera out
Hmm.
and take some
Yes.
photos.
Yeah. Yeah. It's obligatory. Yeah.
It is. And I think are you near the Nanaimo area of Vancouver Island?
Yes. Yes. Yeah, I am. Yeah, and I've been here for about 14 years now. I moved
Oh,
actually from Vancouver, the mainland.
oh, I went the
Um,
opposite
so-
direction. I was born
oh,
on the
did
island
you?
and I came
Oh,
to
I
the
didn't
mainland.
know that. So yeah, I've been here for about 14 years now.
It's a lovely
In
spot.
Nanaimo. Yeah, it is really nice. Yeah, and it's changed a lot in the last, since I first moved here. I actually wasn't sure I was going to stay, but I kept asking myself that question. Am I staying? Am I going? Am I not? And then, yeah, 14 years later, I'm still here.
You're
And I'm
still
glad
there.
I just kind of stopped questioning and just stayed.
So before we get into the episode, the first question I ask everyone who comes on the show
Mhm.
is, did you feel like you were creative as a kid?
Um, yes, absolutely. And the only reason I can say that confidently now is because I've had so much contrast in my life from, times when I was highly creative to times when I was a little bit more like systematic and like not so artistic, I guess we'll put it that way. And looking back, I can see that I'm sure we'll talk more about this, but looking back, I can see now that creativity was something that was always really, really innate with me. I think it's innate in a lot of people, maybe
Mhm.
all of us, but it was something that was, really true to my, like, it was within my nature and it made me feel like a whole person, I guess is the best way to put it. Like, yeah, as a child, I never considered myself like, oh, I'm creative. It was, growing up in my, with my family, my dad was actually a very, very creative person. And so it's something that was just like very normalized in our
Mhm.
home. And it wasn't until sort of my later years in like elementary school and high school that I started getting labeled as like the creative person or like the artist, right? But yeah, as a child, I never thought I was creative. I was just being a kid and doing things that I loved doing. My dad taught me how to paint and draw, and my mom was also very creative. She taught me how to bake and to cook as well as sewing. So there was a lot of creative pursuits that I had as a child. And of course, too, growing up, this was in like the 80s and 90s. So there wasn't a lot of like major technology at the time. So I think
No.
I had to like really find ways to entertain myself. We had TV and what have you. And I think the internet was just kind of becoming a thing when I was growing up. So my, a lot of the things that I did for me time, as a child and like a young me, was yeah, all the creative pursuits. Like I would sew, I would cook and bake. I did a lot of gardening with my parents too. And I had this one particular doll. We didn't have a lot of toys growing up. And it wasn't because we were poor or anything or hard done by, but my dad is German. And so he's a very practical man, and take that for what you will. So I didn't have a lot of toys, but I did have this one doll. And I remember as a kid just absolutely like loving this doll. And I created a whole life for her. So I would sew clothes for her. I would, have these imaginative adventures that she would go on. And she was a big part of my childhood, and I think really helped me be creative as a child too,
Mhm.
right?
Mhm.
It was something I enjoyed doing, and um, yeah. So I know I'm rambling, but the
No, it's
long
okay. I
story
love
short
it. I
is
love this
that
question. This is my favorite
yeah,
question to ask. And I
it's
think,
a really good question. It did really make me think about it. Like, was I really creative as a child? And I think the answer really is yes, I was highly creative. Um, and looking back, I can really see how much that, my childhood shaped who I am and like what I really enjoy doing now and all that. So
it's so interesting because I think we're all creative as kids. Some of us
yes,
continue on that way, some of us lose it, but I don't
yes,
think the creativity is ever gone. But the interesting thing with this question is that even though we are all creative as children, you just have to watch kids. They're all creative,
mm-hmm.
but
Yeah,
some people so identify with being creative as kids, and other people who come on the show are just like, nope, was not creative as a kid. But as they start to talk about the things they did as a kid, it's like, yeah, you were creative, but they never identified as that. So it's
absolutely.
fascinating
It really
how
is.
we
Yeah.
kind of self-identify. So
Yeah.
yeah,
And watching my two, because I have two boys,
right.
watching them as well is I really do see that. And it does make me think about, when I was little, just watching them and the things that they do and the things that they play and, whatever they're building out of Lego or what have you, you're absolutely right. It's just the thing that I think we are innately quite creative, but we just
Yeah.
don't identify that way. And for
It's
me, it wasn't until I started being called the creative person or the artist, in high school that I was
mm.
like, oh, I guess I am that. So,
Oh, interesting. So
but
it
yeah,
was when other
yeah,
people started to say that's who you
yeah.
were, is it
Other
that you
people
really
started,
realize, yeah, it's so
yeah,
interesting.
yeah.
So when did you pick up a camera? Because I noticed you didn't mention that as something
Oh,
you did when you were younger. So where did the camera come from?
the photography was something I think was really intimidating for me. Back in
Mm.
high school, there was a photography class that you could take, and I wanted nothing to do with it. I was, no, I'll do the fine arts, I'll do the drawing and the painting and the acting, but I'm not going to go near that technology stuff because that seems scary to me. Go figure. And and it really wasn't until my first son was born that I really got into photography. He was sort of my inspiration to start. And I've heard this from quite a few other photographers. They say, when they had their kids, they wanted to capture really special photos of them.
Hmm.
And so they started doing photography. And that's really what happened for me too. I had, my son was born. I had told my husband that, oh, I kind of think I'd like to get into photography. And this sort of bleeds into, I'm sort of jumping ahead with, where I've been in my journey, but essentially it was around 2015, after my son was born, that I just really fell in love with photography. And funny enough, I had actually, through this discovery of this new passion I had found out my dad was also quite the avid photographer when he was
Oh,
growing up.
interesting.
And so, yeah, we ended up having it was like bonding for us, like extra
Hmm.
bonding. So maybe it was also something in my DNA. I don't know, because my dad was really big into photography. That yeah. So
That's interesting. It's
yeah.
same with me and my mom. We have the same kind of, that's how uh photography sort of came about for me. And it's interesting. I have another friend who came to Canada as a teenager from Poland and picked up photography as an adult, and it was talking to his dad years later that he discovered his father had been a photographer in Poland and had left all his photography gear behind when they came to Canada. And he had no idea. He didn't remember seeing his dad with a camera. And yet that's what his dad had done. And it became this whole bonding experience for them as many years later. So interesting.
That's really sweet. Wow.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Did you go out and buy it? Like, did you have a camera or did you just decide like I'm
Oh.
gonna I gotta go out and buy one because I want to take some pictures?
Yeah. So what ended up happening was I told my husband about, I kind of think I'd like to, because I was just using like my phone camera to take pictures of my
Right.
son. I'm like, no, it needs to be better than this, because my perfectionist brain that was like, no, it has to be this way. And so he had initially bought me a camera for my birthday, and it was just a Panasonic bridge camera, like nothing super
Hmm.
fancy. And it was actually a really great little camera. I got some really awesome shots with it, and I actually did get quite a bit of work with it too. But um, yeah, so that's how it started, and then I had then ventured on to looking at full DSLR cameras, and then yeah, everything just kind of took off from there. It was sort of the missing piece, I guess. Once I learned the limitations of the bridge camera that I was using,
Right.
I then moved on to like a full DSLR, and it was, I remember when it was in my hands, it just felt so natural and right, and that yeah,
It
I
just
still
fit. It
have that.
just fit.
It just fit. Yes, it felt so good. Um, so yeah.
How did you learn? Like once you realized, hey, this is something that really piques my interest. Like I want to
Mhm.
learn more. Was it just kind of um, getting to a point where the photo didn't match what you had in your head, or was it because you mentioned that you shied away from it as a teenager because of the
Mhm.
tech behind it? So what was it that kind of helped you overcome that hesitation, I guess?
I don't know if I could pinpoint one thing.
Mm,
It's more just that I suddenly felt this um, really strong desire to want to do it.
mm,
And then I spent and keep in mind too, so my son was just born. I was on mat leave. So I had quite a bit of, no, I shouldn't say quite a bit of free time because I have a young baby,
no,
obviously.
but they do sleep a
But
lot
they'd
when they're
sleep, yeah. He would sleep. And I wanted something to keep me, stimulated in a way. And so I really relished learning um, how to take photos and how to work my camera. And I learned it all online, like just through YouTube
Mhm,
tutorials. And my dad as well taught me in
mhm.
some techniques. Of course, he was, very used to shooting with film, and he would use an old school light meter when he was out photographing, right? Because this was in like the 60s and 70s. And
Yeah, yeah, that's what you
so,
use.
yeah, that's what he used. So, so most of what I learned came from online tutorials, and I just sort of pieced things together. And there was a lot of trial and error. I never really took a solid. I never took a course in photography, and I'm not saying that I'm so great. Like I never took a course. I wanted to, but of course, finding the time to do that
Yeah.
was a little bit tricky. So I pieced things together, and I did a lot of trial and error. I mean, a lot. Um, I think
That
every
is,
photographer takes a long time to get to where they feel comfortable, with
yeah.
when they're working with the camera. And it did take me a long time.
It,
Um,
that's one of the
but
beauties of being able to learn. Like digital photography has made photography so much more accessible to people because you can make those mistakes and experiment without having to pay for the film and the processing and all of that. So you have that opportunity to try a lot of different things and do the trial and error, which is, I don't think we would have been able to do in the 70s and 80s, I think so.
absolutely. Yeah, I think about that all the time. And that was one of the things that my dad had taught me. He said, just because you have a DSLR camera doesn't mean you can just fire off shots all the time. He said, really be mindful about what you're trying to capture, and think about it before you hit the button. Really give yourself, think, okay, if this was the only photo I would be able to take, would I be happy with what I see in camera?
Mhm.
Obviously, that's not easy to do when you're working with like a moving subject, let's say, right? You just need to fire that
Yeah.
shutter button, right? But with that was more so with like my kids. I would just, okay, just keep clicking the button until I get something. But with food photography, my dad did teach me to, just kind of slow down a little bit and, you know, work work what you see in the camera until you're happy with it, and then hit the shutter.
Yeah.
And but yeah, and it's funny because a lot of I do food photography. That's my thing. But when I learned to use my camera and to edit photos, it came from a lot of the stuff that I studied was actually I learned from landscape photographers, which
Mm.
seems really strange. But back when I started, there wasn't a whole ton of education around food photography like there is now. And so I took what I could from, these landscape photographers or like portrait photographers, and then just started trial and error applying it to food. So and slowly I got there. So yeah.
What was it that led you to food? I mean, you started out, you wanted to take pictures of your kids, totally understandable.
Yeah.
Like you said, a lot of people do that.
Yeah.
And then somewhere along the way you started shooting food and you started a food blog. Like what
Yes.
led you to that?
So, oh my gosh, that's it's kind of a long story. Like, so to really do that question justice, I think I have to kind of go back quite a bit. And so my 20s were really a time of where I wouldn't say I abandoned my creativity, but after high school, I pursued a completely different path. I wasn't doing a lot of artistic stuff. I wasn't doing theater. I didn't pursue fine arts or anything remotely like that. I went into sciences and what ended up happening was so when I say sciences, I mean like health sciences. So I studied exercise science, which seems very different from what I'm doing now. Um, so I did that in university. And then I really fell in love with the whole, you know, health thing and being, you know, really active and athletic and, you know, structured and just goal oriented, I guess is the best way to put it. And
Mhm.
always on the go. So I so within that industry is a lot of like this was also a long time ago when like diet culture was really, really
Rampant. Yes.
it was very rampant. That is the best word, yes. It was very rampant. And I ended up becoming a fitness competitor, which takes that diet culture to an extreme to attain a certain physique and a
Right.
certain look,
Yeah.
right? And I did do several competitions, but with that came this like hyper regimented eating.
Yeah.
You know, you got to get this much protein, you got to drink this much water every day, you got to do XYZ every day, and your macros and your all this stuff. And it took my original love of food and baking as a child and just sort of pushed it away. I was like, no, that's not, you know, this is the way I am and this is how I'm going to eat and, you know, lead my life. And eventually what happened was, I'll try to make this not too long of a story, but my during all this time, you know, working in the health industry, my dad ended up having a stroke, and I sort of fell into this like really dark place. And I found that I couldn't exercise my way out of that dark place. I couldn't structure my life out of this dark place. I couldn't achieve more and more and more goals to get out of this dark place that I was in. And my dad is fine, by the way. Like he's good, just for the record.
That's good.
But what ended up happening was I had to rediscover um, my love and my passion for food, the things that I loved as a child and that creative expression through food. And it was funny because it was such a stark contrast going from, you know, this child that loved cooking and baking to then this hyper structured way of eating all the time and looking at food to then having to rediscovering that
Mm.
love again. And it was it was a really, really hard time in my life, but it was also a really amazing time because I then found my way out of the darkness again. And it was through rediscovering my love for creating in the kitchen. So cooking and baking and, you know, those types of things.
Mm-hmm.
And then what ended up happening was I started dabbling with the idea of starting a food blog. And this was in 2009. So then I did start one. It was on a blogger.com and
Yep.
very, very, very basic. And I was taking pictures of my food this was, I think, even before iPhones were a thing, maybe. I didn't have an iPhone, but I was using a flip phone. And I was taking my food photos with this flip phone and
They were
posting
probably
them.
orange,
They
weren't
were
they?
a little bit grainy. a little bit, they actually have a kind of a bluey tinge to them. But I was super proud of those photos. Um, so the yeah, the food blog sort of was sort of born out of that time. And, but it wasn't until about 2015 that I picked it up again. So I kept it as a hobby, sort of just like a thing that I did on the side for fun.
Mm-hmm.
It really, I think that I maybe had like 5 subscribers to it. You know, it was very small. Um, but I was happy with it. I just enjoyed doing it. But then when I had my first son and I was on mat leave and I had found this love of photography, I found myself with an opportunity to actually take, food blogging and food photography to another level. And I did. So I started using my camera to take better pictures of food and really started down that path. And I just fell in love with it. So as much as I loved taking photos of my son, uh, it was food that really sort of captured or helped me capture this love of photography. And maybe it was the fact that I got, food doesn't move around. So it was so
Yes.
much easier to just take photos. I could set it up exactly how I wanted. I could have some control. And so that's sort of how I fell into food photography. So it didn't sort of come out of nowhere, but it was definitely, yeah, it came through like a rediscovery and then combining it with this new passion I had for photography. And yeah.
That's that's
Yeah.
so interesting. We've had a lot of people on the show who were food bloggers who've moved on to other creative pursuits.
Mhm.
We've had some who are still food bloggers on the show.
Mhm.
And it's interesting how many people who went into food blogging did it for similar reasons to you. And that's very similar to my story too, it came out of um kind of a rediscovery or wanting to or just looking for an escape, from a bad situation. Or a surprising number of PhD people have been on the show who started their food
Amazing.
blogs while
Yeah,
doing their
amazing.
dissertations as an escape,
Yeah.
and things like that. And it's interesting how food is what has helped so many of them connect
Mhm.
back to who they were. So
Yes,
that's an
that's
interest.
exactly it. I
Yeah,
think you really described it well. It wasn't, I mean, it was an escape, but I looked at it as more like it just like it really lifted me out of, I it was like this really dark place I was in, and
yeah,
it just helped me feel like I could use like be creative in like I guess a productive way maybe
yeah,
because I think a lot of
yeah,
people think, oh,
yes.
art's not productive, you can't make a living doing that, where you got to be successful. And I think for me, I still sort of had that nagging voice in my head, but I
Mhm.
felt like with food it's practical, it's super
You have
creative,
to eat,
it's
right?
we have to eat, yes. And it really helped me move out of that time and
Yeah.
into where I am now. Like, so
It's a very
yeah,
common thread that seems to
yeah.
run through a lot of food blogs.
Mhm.
I was just working with a new client last week, and her food blogs was came out of her father passing away. That's what helped
Mm.
her deal with her grief. And so it's just
Yeah,
um yeah, it food is such a
it's a comfort.
it is. It's a comfort, it's a connector, it's so many
Yes,
things. It's so much
yes,
more than just food.
it absolutely is. Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely.
And you were also, like I mentioned at the beginning, you're an avid gardener. And
Mhm.
I mean, the things we grow in our vegetable gardens are also food, but you do shoot a lot of your gardening. I always think of you as the
Yes.
tomato lady because I know you love.
Yeah, that's a good descriptor, actually. Yeah.
So yeah, so I think that was probably a pretty natural progression for you to start photographing what you were growing as well.
Yes, because it was a big part of my life too. And when I had moved over here, I mean, I had a garden, at my parents' place, we would garden. but it wasn't until I met my husband and then we started living together and he knew how much I loved vegetables, basically. So he was like, well, we're gonna start a garden back here. And we did. And I was still sort of just kind of once I got back into the swing of food blogging and taking it more seriously, I realized I have this whole wonderful opportunity to share, what I'm growing alongside what I'm cooking and baking.
Mhm. Yeah.
So, and I really did, well, I do really enjoy photographing produce. Again, I think because it's a still subject, it doesn't
Mhm.
move very much. But I also love like green hues.
Yeah.
I think for all of us are very calming. And I just find it very soothing to also be outside and taking photographs of food in its natural state, so to speak, I guess. I really enjoy doing that as well. And I just find our vegetables and produce are so photogenic. I find them
They
so
are.
photogenic. And I don't have to, I think what it is too is because when I'm working with food, I'm very strategic about, this lettuce leaf here and this little drop of dressing here and what have you. But with tomatoes on a vine, they just are. And so
Hmm.
I can just take my camera out there and I just take photos and I don't want to say it's like easy, but it has a little bit more of like this like calm, sort of just gentle flow to it, where I don't
Yeah.
have to think too much about before I press the shutter, right? So,
Mother Nature just seems to know how to make beautiful color palettes
yes.
and how things should hang and how things should flower. And
Mhm.
we don't have to improve upon what she does,
Yes,
really. We just need to capture it.
absolutely. That's exactly right. I mean, I don't have to improve upon what I'm seeing. It's just that is it, and it's
It's
beautiful.
perfect. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely.
You have a very specific style, and
Mhm.
I feel like when I see a photo, I can tell immediately that that's a Heidi Richter photo.
Mhm.
And for those of you who are not familiar with Heidi's work, you should definitely go check it out on Instagram or on her blog. It's it's very moody. You love the
Mhm.
dark and moody, but at the same time,
Mhm.
it's very vibrant. There's a lot of color. It to me, growing up here, and you grew up here too, it
Mhm.
has a very Pacific Northwest flavor to it. Like it
Mhm.
just feels like the West Coast. And you have this way of playing with light so that your images are both dark and light at the same time. And I know that's not easy to capture.
Mhm.
So what, like, I'm not even sure how to ask the question, but like, what kind of led you to discover, like, how do you, I'm not even being articulate about it. But it's like this interplay of light and dark that seems to
Mhm.
come very naturally to you.
Mhm.
Does it come naturally to you, or is it something that you seek out?
I would say so. Um that's a thank you, by the way. I think when it so I do find a lot of beauty in like moody days.
Mhm.
Maybe not so, like this last winter. I was like, okay, this winter needs to be done. I want it to be summer so bad. This is the first year I was like, I'm done with clouds. I'm
The
done with
same
overcast.
feeling.
Yeah. But for the first little while, I just relished in an overcast day. And I know every photographer probably feels the same way that, that nice diffused sunlight
Mhm.
coming in through the window or in the garden space is just idyllic for capturing, you know, the perfect amount of highlight and the perfect amount of shadow. And so I do tend to seek that out. If I do have a nice cloudy day, I will go out with my camera and take photos. Unless it's, a sunny day, then I'll go at a golden hour and,
Mhm.
shoot away. But I think for me, I've also really enjoyed there's there's something about the Pacific Northwest, the history of the Pacific Northwest, that I just really enjoy. And I don't think that you can, like, I find a sense of magic in it. I don't know
Hmm.
how else to describe it. But so, like, living here, I feel like it's easy to capture that because we live in the Pacific Northwest and we have nothing but Pacific Northwest weather. So it's it's easy. I don't have to do a lot to sort of make that happen.
Yeah.
But and that's not to say that there isn't, a way to capture the brightness of the Pacific Northwest as well. But I do really, yeah, I love the moodiness of an overcast day. And when I'm editing, so a lot of, what comes out of my camera might look quite quite different to, a final image that I may post on my blog or post on social media. And a lot of that does have to do with the editing as well. So I tend to shoot at like a lower, this is a little bit technical, but I do tend to shoot a little bit underexposed.
Hmm.
So then when I'm working with the editing software, I can then sort of enhance the blacks and the shadows, but yet also bump up my highlights and my whites without it becoming overblown, like where the
Hmm.
whites are all blown out. So there's a little bit of strategy in how I create those images, of course, but in, overall, it's just living here. I'm happy that you get that vibe from my photos. So, and sometimes I do wonder, is it just because it is where I live, or is it something more strategic that I'm doing? But I think it is just a combination of those
I'm sure
two.
it's a
So
combination. There is something
yeah,
about living here that it seeps into your being, and the
yes,
same way that I'm sure that
yeah,
that golden wheat
yeah,
field against a dark sky
hmm,
seeps into
yes,
the being of
yeah,
somebody from the prairies and things like that.
yeah.
So
Say living on the island too. I think I really do feel more encapsulated in that sort of Pacific Northwest
mm,
atmosphere.
yes.
And because there's so much more, it's just maybe a little bit more rugged, I guess, I would say,
No,
compared
definitely.
to like when I was living in Vancouver. Um,
Definitely. Vancouver's kind of
yeah,
got the shelter of the island, so we don't
yes,
feel that wildness
yes,
in the same way that you do on Vancouver Island. And the further,
yes,
if you're on the
yeah,
west coast of Vancouver Island, it's very wild
yeah,
at times. So it's I
yeah.
do feel like it becomes part of your DNA at some point.
I was gonna say though, like living, like having, when I was younger, we used to come to the island for holidays, and I remember those times being so magical as well. So I think being here and finding that inspiration is just something that or finding that, Pacific Northwest flair is something that I really do want to evoke with my images, because I do find, like I said it before, I do find it like a very sort of magical atmosphere. So
Yeah, it's a very rugged, wild feeling. And I always
yeah.
feel most at home when I'm on the west side of the island. I try to go to the west side for storm season whenever I can, because there's just something about it that I find incredibly peaceful and relaxing, even though it's incredibly wild when you're there at that time of year. To
Yeah.
me, it's calming. I don't know how to explain it, except that's
Yeah.
just how it feels to me. So,
Yeah.
yeah. You, I love talking about the development of style and things because it's so
Mm,
unique to everybody. But how do you push your boundaries when it comes to developing that style? Because you do have a
mm,
unique style. What is it that makes you kind of uh, push yourself creative, push yourself creatively
yeah.
to get yourself to a new level?
Yeah. I mean, when I was first starting out in photography, and I knew what I wanted to capture, I knew the style that I wanted to capture. And it it took a long time, and it did take a lot of testing things out. And it wasn't, I think it wasn't until I found the right shooting space in my home that I kind of like was able to really hone in on that style. But that being said, working as a food photographer, I'm not I can't just rely on one particular style with the work I do. So
Mhm.
while for my personal endeavors, be it my blog or my social media, that works and I can maintain that. But there are lots of different clients that I've worked with that also like to see other type of
Yes.
work as well. And it's funny you say that because for me, being a more shadowy type shooter, I find it very challenging to go bright, very challenging. And so that's where I have to push my boundaries. And that's where I have to work hard to find something that I'm not very comfortable with. Like I will be honest, I'll be completely honest and transparent. Shooting bright things is very intimidating for me. So I have to, I still do a lot of trial and error with that. I've kind of worked a way, in my shooting space where I can get that vibe and it can, I can translate it well. So a client image is sort of what they're looking for. But I do find it, and I should actually mention too, because people might be like, well, why don't you just use artificial light? I don't use an artificial light. So
Oh, you
I have,
don't. So you
no,
you're
I
you're
don't.
100% natural
Yeah,
light. Okay.
I
It just
just use natural light. And, um, but that also is another thing that I have been keen to learn. So that is the next thing on my list is
mm,
to actually really work on artificial light because now having two kids, my time is even more constrained. So when I have to work, if I'm working with natural light, I'm only working within a certain number of hours during the day.
yeah.
And if that's the winter, that's even less hours. So,
Yes.
being a mom of two, it's there has to be, I have to push my boundaries and I have to find a way to create the light I want even if the time is not right or the weather is not right. So that's actually something that I am starting to do is to look at pursuing artificial light as well. So and being in this industry, you really do have to stay up, with all, the latest things.
Yeah.
So I can't just rely on, one way of doing things because it's really going to limit
Yeah.
my reach and my potential for, future clients. So I have to force myself to do new things all the time. I am a big creature of habit and it doesn't come naturally. So
It's
I,
easy
I
to,
literally have, yeah,
yeah, to get into that rut where you're comfortable, where you can
yes,
deliver the image because you're comfortable.
exactly.
Yeah, it's
Yeah,
it's I think all creative. I don't think it's just photography. I think all of us
yeah,
as creatives fall into
yeah, absolutely.
that rut. And
Yeah,
so and that's something we haven't really mentioned. We've talked about you as a blogger and
yeah.
your blog is The Simple Green and
Mhm.
it was a Taste Canada Award nominee blog. So
Yeah,
but you actually
yeah,
do a lot of editorial and commercial work, which we should talk about now.
yeah.
So I'm going to guess just based on what we've talked about so far today that the commercial and the editorial, the freelance work came out of your blog. Like, is that
Yes.
what led? Yeah, so that's what led
Yeah,
you to getting that kind of work. So,
yeah,
we always try to combine the business of being a working creative with the creative side on the show. So, maybe we could dive into that a little bit.
sure. Mhm.
In terms of the editorial and commercial work that you do, and some of the places where you may have seen Heidi's work, you shoot regularly for Edible,
Mhm.
Vancouver Island, and you've done
Mhm.
some other work for other edible magazines
Mhm.
across North America. Do you actively pitch yourself to get work, or does it come to you?
So I'm one of the lucky ones. Well, I shouldn't say that. Basically, to date, all of the work that I have had has come through somebody finding me on social media,
Right,
somebody referring me to someone else, or like so previous clients, I should say,
right.
referring me, or through my online portfolio. That's how people find me. And for some reason, my portfolio lately has been really keeping me active. I get lots of requests for quotes now, which is
Mm,
great.
yeah.
I know I must have done something right with the SEO on my portfolio site. A lot of I have not had to actively pitch, although I have done that for, if I want to do like sponsored work with my blog. There's been a couple people that I have pitched, and some of them I've gotten, some of them I haven't. But a lot of the work that I had over the years has come from social, like my social media presence has been
Mhm.
huge, a huge factor in that. And as much as I love what social media and particularly Instagram has done for me and provided for me, I also I think there was a time where I relied on it too much and sort of neglected my blog in a way.
Mhm.
And looking, to like ad revenue and things like that, and creating more content there. It's something that has just sort of come to me, and I've managed to get quite a bit of work just through people finding me on social media, and big brands too that have found me and said, hey, like
Mhm.
Vitamix, for example, found me initially. I think it was 2017. They found me through my work on Instagram. I think I tagged them in one post, not because I wanted to be like, hey, Vitamix, like just because it was what you do, right?
Yes,
Everybody
yes, it is
tags,
what you do.
big,
Yeah.
yeah. And I guess they had seen it, and yeah, had contacted me. And then I worked for them for about 2 years, pretty much full time. It was a contract job, but it was pretty much that just consumed a lot of my time for those 2 years. And then I just kind of got other clients that just, yeah, they just found me and decided, we want you to work for us. And can you do this?
A lot of people, they want to be a photographer, or they want to be a
Mm-hmm.
painter, they want to be a writer, or whatever it may be, and they're good, like they're good at what they do, but they get
Mm-hmm.
really stuck on how to get paid to do what they love to
Mm-hmm.
do and what they're good
Yeah.
at.
Yeah.
And so while you might not be pitching directly, you're still putting your work out there to be seen. Like you wouldn't be getting these contracts and freelance opportunities if your work wasn't out there. Like, and I think this is something that I don't know, we don't learn this stuff in school, right? So
Mm-hmm.
it's one of those things where if you're new to this, it can be very overwhelming to figure out like how do I get seen? And so
Mm-hmm.
was that something, I mean, blogging, and we've done an episode on this, everyone, if you're if you're listening, it wasn't too long ago, about how blogging can be amazing for your SEO as a freelance creative, because it's everything that the search engines looks for. It's consistent
Mm-hmm.
content, um it's using keywords, it's all the things that can get you out there. But you're using social media. Do you have like a strategy? Like, do you think about it on a regular basis? Like, I need to get something out there, I need to show I'm still
Yeah.
active.
So not in the last little while, no. Like I completely honest, no, it's kind of fallen to the wayside a bit. But that's like we can maybe talk about that, why I haven't really been doing a lot of that. Maybe a little bit later. But basically this was all sort of like pre-pandemic time too. Like
Hmm.
I spent a lot of time actively putting my work out there. So
Yeah.
I was posting on Instagram very regularly. I made sure to show up on, Instagram stories to share parts of my life or share behind the scenes of what I'm doing, on a shoot, or, just like what's growing in my garden kind of thing,
Right.
or yeah, like the new, and then promoting what the work I'm doing on my blog through social media as well. And, and then working with SEO and things like that. So there was a lot of strategy definitely to try to get my work out there, and then developing my online portfolio, which in previous years I had it just as a page on my blog, which
Mm.
really wasn't. Yeah, I mean it worked for a little bit, but it wasn't until I sort of moved it to its own separate, to its own separate site that it I found that it's been way more helpful for me. And so yeah, I think you're right. It's so I'm not maybe actively pitching, but I am sort of passively pitching, I guess, if
Yes.
that's maybe a
Yeah,
good
no,
way
that's a
to
good
put
way to
it.
put it. Yeah.
So, and then I do like if I'm out and about, um, I I won't hesitate to mention to somebody, hey, you know what, well, I do food photography. So, like for example, small cafes or what have you, and just letting them know, like just kind of put the bug in their ear. And then if they,
How
want
do
to talk more about it or contact me, then great. I
how
don't
do
do
you
it.
do that?
So,
Like, because I
so
think that is so intimidating for a lot of
it,
people to just.
so I think for like, it is very intimidating, but I'm not intimidated by it anymore because I think I've sort of come to a place where I'm a little bit more confident in what I do.
Hmm.
And I also had spent quite a few years working as an account manager in the health industry. So I was it was basically like I was working in sales to a point. It wasn't like
Mm.
I didn't do cold calling, like I just managed accounts. So I would constantly be, working with all, clients or I should say stores, for example, that were like already working with us. And so I was like pitching, if there was like new products and things like that. But yeah, I guess I'm not really intimidated by it anymore. And I think now in particular, because we're sort of coming into this like age of like AI, and I know that that's gonna, kind of shake up the
Hmm.
photography world. And I don't know exactly how it's going to shake it up, but I'm sure it's going to. And so I want to make sure that I still have, a viable career with photography. So
Hmm.
I
Yeah.
want to let people know, hey, I'm local here. So if you don't want to resort to doing things, like the AI way or whatever, like just here's my contact information or here's my portfolio. And, if you want, we can talk about it. Right. So I think I've just sort of had to force myself to not be afraid to do that, even though like there are still times in all honesty, where I feel like I have imposter syndrome, where I'm like, I can't believe I'm doing this. Like, what are you doing? Like, who do you think you are? Kind of thing, I still really do get like that. But at the same time, I scale it back and remember, okay, this is what I do for work. This is what I want to do for work. And if I want to do this, I need to, I need to sort of stay active and I need to let people know. Um,
It's
and
true. You have to
so,
get over yourself. You have to
yes,
just
yeah,
do it.
yeah.
It's
Mm-hmm.
we did an episode a few weeks ago with Alexandra Newbold. She's a courtroom illustrator, and that was part of the conversation, how she got her first gig. She went to the courtroom to do sketching practice,
Mm-hmm.
not to become a courtroom illustrator.
Yeah.
And she went with her brother one day, and he said, he sort of pointed out where all the journalists were to her and said, you should just take your sketches over to them, see if they can use them. And she was like, what?
That's
But that's what
amazing.
she did.
Yeah.
And that's how she
Yeah.
got her first illustrations published in the
Mm.
newspaper. And I think so many of us are so just find the idea of doing that either terrifying or, as you said, like what do you mean? Like who am I to
Mm-hmm.
go up there and presume that I'm good enough to have my work in the
Yeah.
paper or to be hired by these people? And
Yeah.
and yet it is those personal connections that and those personal relationships that help you forge a long-lasting career. I think that's my personal
Yeah.
feeling, is
For
that
sure. For
you
sure.
need that. Yeah.
Yeah.
Um, you have also been a Nikon ambassador, and for those of you out there in who are not photographers, this is something that Nikon and Canon both kind of do, where they have like these sort of year-long ambassadorships where they work with 4 or 5 people, I would say. I'm not as familiar with Nikon as I am with Canon,
Mm-hmm.
but how, those are generally speaking very coveted positions. Like, and I can't remember what year you did it in. It feels like it was last year, but I think it was probably the year before.
I think it was 2020 or
Oh, it's
2021.
even further than I.
Yeah, I think because my little guy was still quite young. I do remember doing quite like when I was working for them or
Mhm.
doing work with them. I still had him in a carrier. So I would be doing work and he would be like on my back,
Right.
carrying him around. So I think it was about 2020.
How did that come about that they approached you and offered you one of these spots?
So you want to talk about like imposter syndrome? That was like the height of my imposter syndrome. Okay, because I I was they had actually found me through social media,
Hmm.
and I'm not sure exactly how,
Hmm.
but they had found my work and they wanted to work with me. And I remember the day I got the email, I was sitting on the couch and I just like went up and I was like, oh, what's this? Oh, okay. So and so from like, I'm like, what? Okay, whatever. I thought it was just like some, you know, spam thing or, join our affiliate program. Not that they would do that, but I just didn't really think anything
Because
of it.
it
And then I read
seems
that
so
it was
like it's
I was like, no way. Right.
everyone I know who's had some huge opportunity come their way has initially thought that the email was spam. It's
Yeah.
hilarious, really.
So yeah, I did. I looked at it. I was like, okay. And then I think it didn't really hit me that this is Nikon Canada communicating with me. It didn't really sink in until like later that day. I told my husband, I'm like, look at this email that I got. Like, can you, what, And yeah, it was really, really surreal. It was very similar to the time when I started working with Vitamix because I was so new. Like, I just felt like, and again, too, like, I was like, are you sure you got the right person? Like, do you really want to hire? Like, are you sure about this? Uh, and I still get that sometimes though. But but yeah, that was such an amazing opportunity. And I remember at the time they had started launching their mirrorless line. So that's what
Mm.
this was about. They wanted to have, photographers and online creators, using their mirrorless technology and falling in love with it, which I did. Like it's
It's
really awesome.
fantastic. Yes,
Oh
yes.
my gosh, mirrorless camera. Whew. Um, so working with it, yeah, it was about a year that I had worked with them, and I shared a bunch of behind the scenes, like how I shoot certain things, and then I ended up doing. I think it was the following year. Maybe it was, yeah, it might have been 2022, 2023. I can't remember now. Anyways, they had asked me to do an online presentation on food photography. So this was still sort of during, sort of the tail end of the pandemic, but
Hmm.
Nikon had started this series called Stay Inspired. So they wanted to, use or have photographers talk online to their, community about, different topics. And they had asked me to speak about food photography. And so I put together, it was actually quite a lengthy presentation and did that for them online. And it was definitely one of the highlights of my career to date. I hope I have other highlights coming down the road, but that was really, really special. And it actually came at a time when I had been going through creative burnout
Mm.
because I was, I had been this was when I had just one kid. And I really did throw myself into my work. I loved doing it. But of course, I also loved being a mom and I wanted to be 100% a mother and I wanted to 100% be successful in my photography career and my blogging career. And it took a toll, to make a long story quite short. I'm just going to give you the Cliff Notes version, but I did suffer from very like creative burnout. And when I got that Nikon email, I had really scaled back what I was doing. And of course it was, the pandemic time and I had my second son. So I kind of lost a bit of motivation
Hmm.
to create.
Yeah.
And then when I got that email, it was like, like a fire got lit under my butt again, right? Like I was like, oh my gosh, like for real? Like maybe maybe this is really what I should be doing, or because I had a bunch of doubts too, right? Like
Yeah.
going through creative burnout is very difficult. It was
Yes.
very difficult. And I'm still feeling the effects of it now.
Hmm.
I can say that I'm probably, starting to come out of it a little bit more and sort of finding my love for photography and creating in a way that's not just solely business oriented. That's not just for earning cash. And,
Yeah.
it,
Yes.
it's, and that's been very healing for me. So similar to like what I went through in my 20s, like
Hmm.
rediscovering that the healing power of like being creative, just for its own sake.
Yes.
So, but yeah, then the Nikon thing was really, I almost looked at it as, not to sound very woo woo, but it was a little bit like the universe saying, okay, come on,
Yeah.
pick yourself up. Let's go. Come on. You,
Yeah.
you can do this. This is what you know in your heart you want to do. And so here you go. Right. Like it was, yeah, it was really wonderful. So, and I feel super, super lucky that I got to have that experience with them. So,
Yeah, it's a very, very cool
mhm.
thing.
Yeah.
I remember when I saw you announce that were going to be doing this, I was like, "Wow, that's
Yeah.
incredible! Like, way to
Yeah.
go!"
Yeah. I know. I still sometimes I'm like, how did that even happen? Like what?
It
Yeah.
was it
I'm
was
still
meant to happen, and you certainly have the chops
Yeah.
to
Thank
to
you.
have deserved it. So,
Yeah.
um, you also you alluded to the fact that you're a mom to two young boys,
Hmm.
and that is a lot of work.
Hmm.
How do you manage being a mom and a creative and a business owner? And like you mentioned, you've struggled with burnout. Do you manage it, or do you feel like
Do I
some days
manage it?
it's not
That's a
happening?
really good question. You should ask my husband how well I'm doing now. No, I'm kidding. It is a lot. And my boys were never in daycare, so it was just me home with them.
Right,
I was also still working part time in strata management as well, so it was like an office job, and
right,
I was still doing that part time. But when things really started taking off with my blog and photography, I ended up, you know, um, leaving that position behind. So I did have more time to just focus solely on, with the free time that I did have and could carve out, I was, creating and shooting
hmm,
and blogging away. And but at the same time, it's also it is really challenging with two young kids because, um, like I'd mentioned before, I'm if I'm going to do something, I don't want to just do it, mediocre.
right.
So with my kids, I've sort of I've had to learn to like not have mom guilt because it's so damaging. And so I had to really work at, and not letting myself go down that path of like, oh my gosh, I'm not being a good enough mom now because, you know, I have to work, or I have to put in all these other hours to do this. But while being a mother is important, one of the things that I've really learned, taken to heart, is that I still have to look out for me too.
Hmm.
Because in order to be uh, the best mom for my kids, I have to be the best version of myself, which means I have to honor my creativity. I have to honor the things that, bring me joy outside of my family. I
Yep.
have to maintain my sense of individuality outside of just
You have to be
being a
Heidi.
mom. Exactly. Like
Yeah.
I was Heidi for like 33 years before I was Heidi, who was also a mom. So, and that was it. It was life altering, and that, kids are like that.
Yeah.
But yeah, to be the best mom for my kids, I still have to be who I am and to
Yes.
honor what I know to be true for myself. And, um, so that that's sort of how I manage it. I'm better at managing it now. Um, whereas like I think initially it was difficult. And I did have a lot of times where I felt bad that I had to work on a weekend because, my husband and my son, they wanted to go do this thing or whatever. And I couldn't
Yeah.
always come because I had to work. And I've come to a better place now where I've got a little bit more of a balance and I'm much more aware of my own limitations too.
Mm.
So now that I have two kids, I can't just take on all the work I want. I really do have to be mindful about my family life and
Hmm.
not pushing myself to another point of possible burnout because I can't afford to do that again. I don't want to do that again because it's not a fun place to be. So,
It's not a
um,
fun place to be. And you
no,
make a really good point. And
yeah,
I went through a very bad case of burnout in
mm-hmm.
2014, 15.
Mm-hmm.
And when you create for a living, as opposed to creating for enjoyment or a hobby,
Mm-hmm.
burnout is not an option.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
It directly impacts your ability to earn,
mm-hmm.
um, not to mention all the other things it impacts, but it really drove home to me, and I'm guessing it probably did for you, like how important it is for me to manage my mental health and my physical health and all those things that get
Mm-hmm.
um, entwined with creative burnout,
Mm-hmm.
because it was over a year where I was just not functioning,
Yeah,
and not able to do good work, and
mm-hmm.
it can have a very damaging impact on your career if you
Yeah,
don't learn how to get a handle on it and
absolutely.
prevent it.
Yeah, yeah.
So
Yeah,
yeah,
it was a really tricky time for me,
yeah,
I mean, I'm only just sort of really coming out of that time now,
it takes a while.
and
Yeah.
it takes a while. There
It,
were times where I thought, okay, all good to go. I'm great back
mm-mm.
at it. And I threw myself into it again. And then I realized I'm like, oh my gosh, I am not through the woods yet.
Yeah.
So so yeah, recognizing where my boundaries are, what my limits are now. And I think I'm still really learning, still like I'm like still walking a bit on ice, like because
Mhm.
I know that I have these boundaries, but really being able to honor them and know
Yeah.
my limits and know when to say no and to trust that it's okay to say no because
Mm.
I would want to take on everything and I would take on everything. And then I would find myself sort of like scrambling and so stressed out. And then, I might, um, miss out on opportunities with my family because no, I've got to do this. I'm doing, and that's not where I want to be working from. Especially now with two kids, it's not a place where I can be working from. So,
I feel like
um,
that's something that
yeah,
comes a little bit with age too.
yeah,
I think when we're starting
yeah.
out or we're young, we
Mhm.
we always worry that the last opportunity will be the last opportunity. And it
Yes,
takes a while to
yes.
kind of
Mhm.
trust the
Mhm.
universe that it's never the last opportunity. More
Yeah.
opportunities will come, and it can be very, very nerve-wracking when you're young
Hmm.
or when you're starting out and you haven't done
Yeah.
this before, and especially if money
Hmm.
is a factor.
Hmm.
Yeah, trust that if you say no to this, it's okay, because something else will come along. It always does. It just
Yeah.
seems to,
Yeah.
sometimes it takes a little longer than you want it to, but it will
Yeah.
be there.
Exactly. And I have had to, over the last year, there have been a couple of clients that I did have to say no to.
Mhm.
And it was hard. I was like, gosh, this is such a good opportunity. I would so love to do this. But I knew where I was and how I was feeling. And I'm like, I just can't, as much as this opportunity would be great, I can't afford to sacrifice
Yeah.
my health or, getting back to a good place within myself. I can't sacrifice that for this opportunity. And so I have to really trust in that abundance mindset, I guess is the best way to put
Yeah.
it. So like knowing that like and I think this really speaks to creativity too, because creativity, there is such an aspect of abundance to it. Like there is inspiration all around us,
Hmm.
and working in a creative field, I think you have to have a, a little bit of trust in that, that yes, okay, so maybe I did have to say no to this one experience, but knowing that, like creativity, it's always going to be there and it's always going to come back. And so long as I can stay in this sort of like not homeostasis, but maybe a better sense of like sustainable, sustainable like harmony, I guess is a better way to put it. Maybe if I can sort of maintain, not maintain, but like work from a place of that,
Yeah.
then I'm going to feel so much more fulfilled with what I'm doing too, and I'm not going to be, stressed out, and I feel like that would create better work as well. So if
Yeah.
I'm not
Yeah.
running around, with energy that I probably don't have,
Yeah.
then um, I'm going to be able to have more energy to put into something that I'm really proud of. If I can just honor my limitations, and it's hard though. It's very, very
It
hard for
is. And
me.
I
Like,
feel like
yeah.
no matter how many people, how many people tell you to be, I feel like burnout is something, this is going to sound terrible. I'm sorry, but I feel
Mhm.
like burnout is something we all kind of have to go
Mm.
through to understand all of the
Mhm.
things we've just been talking about. Like people can
Yeah.
tell you over and over
Yeah.
again to be careful, you're burning yourself out, this is how you
Mhm.
avoid burnout and things, but it's
Mhm.
not until we actually go
Mhm.
through it that we kind of realize what they were
Mhm.
talking about. It's almost like you have to learn it by going
Yeah.
through it in a way. I think that's truly part of it. And I think sometimes even the first go around with burnout, we ignore it because we kind of
Mhm.
or we were able to take a few weeks off and kind of come back from it and
Mhm.
we think, I'm better. Right?
Yeah.
But your habits don't change and your boundaries
Exactly.
don't change.
Yes.
And
Yes.
so it works for a few months, but then it starts to creep back in. And
Yes. Yeah.
yeah, and
And it happens slowly. Like
it
it just
does.
happens slowly over time, and
Yes,
so it's like a snowball effect.
absolutely.
So
Yeah.
and then it'll just take, one thing, like for, when my dad got sick, that just pushed me over the edge, right?
Hmm.
And then, this other time, like it was for me, I think what really triggered it was, I had my second child. So I was already tired from that. And then throw on top of that a pandemic. Oh, how much fun is that?
Right.
Right? Throw a pandemic on top of that. And then, you know, um, so thinking that I could just, work through all
Mhm.
that and at my regular pace was just like, it was, I don't want to sound like I'm being mean to myself, but it was kind of stupid, you know? So, and I knew it deep down. I'm like, I can't do this, but I did keep pushing myself. And then it led to this. Yeah, I had to learn it the hard way.
Yeah,
That's basically what I'm
I
trying to
think
say.
we
I had to
do.
learn it the hard way. Yeah.
And I think the pandemic, so many of us were just trying to maintain normalcy when it
Yeah.
wasn't a normal situation.
Yes.
And I think
Yeah.
um, trying to force it to be normal, it made things even worse for a lot of people.
Hmm.
So,
Yeah.
um, yeah.
Hmm. Yeah.
I think too, for those listening, you know, boundaries and things like that, those can also change as we grow and as we
Hmm.
enter into different seasons of our life. So,
Hmm.
it's okay to change your boundaries if they're not working for you, or
Yeah.
and I think that takes a little bit of experience to kind of
Yes.
come to terms with as well. So,
Yeah. Yeah.
yeah.
Maybe in, a couple of years from now or whenever I might find myself with more, time and energy where I can maybe get back to,
Yeah,
taking on more client work. And I'm
absolutely.
totally not opposed to that happening, but
Yeah.
just not right now. Exactly. So,
That
yeah.
life is about seasons, right? And sometimes when you're in that season of having two young children, that's a very different season from when those kids are in high school or university or um things change and your time changes as well. So yes.
Yeah.
So On that note, what is next for you? Are you working on anything interesting right now, or you got something, a creative itch you want to scratch, or
Yes, actually, I do. So, back when I first started blogging in 2015, I had also started up um, a YouTube channel. So I was doing video recipes, and I really loved creating videos. And so, and of course, now we're in this whole social media age of reels and short form
yeah,
video. And while I haven't really been able to put a lot of effort into doing that over the last few years, that is something that I know is brewing. It's just
yeah,
sort of sitting there. And it's one of those things where I have to like, again, I want to push myself to do it, but I do want to pursue that again because we are now in an age where, still images are still wonderful and they have their value for sure. But, video is becoming so much more popular.
hmm
And plus two, we've got this sort of AI coming down the pipeline. And I feel that being able to be a human with your work, showing the humanity of, you know, your creativity,
yep.
just being present with it and say, hey, this is me, is really going to be integral in the coming years. So
I
it's
am
something that I've
nodding very
been,
vigorously
yes,
right
like
now.
I really, yeah, I, I know that it's something that I would love to do again. And right now, I think what's going on in my brain is sort of formulating how I want to do that.
hmm
Um, whether I want to, because there was it's funny. I used to actually do a lot of theater acting, but really don't like putting my face in front of the camera. So it's very intimidating for me. So, I have to sort of find a way to work with that and make it work for me in
Yeah.
a way that's also going to be sustainable. I mean, I know I'm going to need to experiment and try new things, and figure out what's really going to work, but just being comfortable, getting my face out there again is sort of the next step for me. So,
That's very
um,
cool. Yeah.
yeah, it is really cool. But of course it's hard too, because I hit my 40s, and I'm also facing the fact that, like, oh wow, like over the last 4 years, I think I've aged quite a bit. Like I don't look like me anymore sometimes. So it's, I think I'm sort of dealing with other things too, or
Mm. It
I'm trying not to be hard on myself
it
yeah,
happens
yeah,
to all of
yeah,
us.
yeah.
But yeah, no, I swear in the mastermind group that I'm in, I think we talk about video every single week and about how
Yeah.
important it's going to be
Hmm. Hmm.
and how we're going to embrace it and things.
I do find it interesting though that while I was so comfortable doing that, or I was so comfortable, performing a role on a stage, I could be so shy and insecure about my face on video on YouTube. Like
Funny.
it is really funny, and maybe it has to do with, that the fact that, I mean, you'd think that doing something live would be more intimidating because you can't just press pause and re-record, right?
Yeah.
But yeah,
I think
I
when you
think,
do it
yeah,
live, you don't see yourself. You're just in the moment. But
right,
when it's on video, somebody plays it
yeah,
back and you get to see it and you're
you're
like,
right.
whoa.
Yeah, and that they could, yeah, pause it at this one, like, oh, look right there. She's got a zit
Yes.
on her face. You see that, right? Like, pick me apart
Yes,
on
the
pause, right?
screen pauses when you and your eyelids or your eyes are rolled back into your
Yeah.
head or something.
Yeah.
Really,
But
yeah.
people don't do that. Like I don't do that to people. So why would I
No,
think people would do that to
I
me?
don't
So
know, because we're
yeah.
irrational, illogical
Yeah.
human beings sometimes.
Yeah.
Well, Heidi, it has been such a pleasure to have you on the show this week. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you. Yeah, it's been great being able to finally chat with you
Yeah,
and
it's been
kind of
so
share
nice.
some of my story. And
I learned a lot
blab
about
on
you
and on.
today.
So
So it
yeah,
was.
yeah.
If people want to find you online, where should they go?
So you can find me on social media. I'm at the simple green, the dot simple dot green. And you can also find me on through my website, either my portfolio, which is HeidiERichter.com, or if you just search the simple green on Google, you'll find my blog there as well. So
Awesome.
I'm kind of all over the internet, not really now. But you can find me. Just search my name, or yeah, just search for the simple green and you'll find me. So
We'll put links to everything in the show notes as well.
yeah.
So if
Hmm.
you are looking to find Heidi and check out some of her beautiful photography and her delicious recipes, you can just click through to the show notes and we'll have all the links for you there. So that is it for this week, everyone. Thank you for being here. And this is just a reminder that our next episode will actually be the season finale for season 5 before we go on break for our summer hiatus. And Heather Travis will, of course, be back for that episode, as she is with every season finale. So, yes, Heidi, thank you so much. It has been great to have you here, and
Thank you.
look forward to seeing what you do next. Look forward to seeing
Thank
your
you. Yeah.
video.
Yeah.
So
You too. Thanks. Thanks, Melissa.
thanks everybody, and we will talk to you all in 2 weeks. Thank you so much for joining us for the And She Looked Up Creative Hour. If you're looking for links or resources mentioned in this episode, you can find detailed show notes on our website at andshelookedup.com. While you're there, be sure to sign up for our newsletter for more business tips, profiles of inspiring Canadian creative women, and so much more. If you enjoyed this episode, please be sure to subscribe to the show via your podcast app of choice so you never miss an episode. We always love to hear from you, so we'd love it if you'd leave us a review through iTunes or Apple Podcasts. Drop us a note via our website at andshelookedup.com or come say hi on Instagram at andshelookedup. Thanks for listening, and we'll see you next week.